Hello and welcome to Conversation Cafe. I'm June Robbins Foreman, your host. Today we'll be looking at Israel-Palestine for Dummies, Session 1. We're going to start to look at the pre-formation of Israel before 1948. We may get to October 7. Before I get into it, I want to make a statement about October 7. I think the attack against the security of Israel, the people of the Jewish people living in Israel on October 7th, was a terrorist attack. I think Hamas is a terrorist group, and that day was a heinous crime against the Jewish people. I think it was deplorable, and anybody protesting for the eradication of Jews needs to stop immediately. We need to get rid of it from our discourse. Having said that, I'll move to the issue of the formation of Israel. So starting with the map, I thought it would be best to give an overview vision of where it is we're talking about in the world in relation to other countries. So you'll see that Palestine before 1948 was one continuous piece of property, and it was bordered in the north by Lebanon, and then to the east, Syria. Actually, Palestine was a province of Syria at one time under the Ottoman Empire. Syria borders it to the east, and then at the time Transjordan, now Jordan, borders it to the southeast. If you move across the map to the west, you'll see Egypt, and then somewhat to the north, the Mediterranean Sea. Above the Mediterranean Sea and slightly more westward is Turkey, and more westward from that is Italy and Greece and other parts of Europe. Just a couple of facts. Israel-Palestine today is about 479 kilometers long. I live in Kelowna, British Columbia. So to compare it, it would be a car's drive from Kelowna to approximately Prince George. And the width, at the greatest part of the width, it's 135 kilometers wide. And that would be approximately a car's drive from Kelowna to Salmon Arm. At the time, before the formation of Israel, the composition of the population was 10% Jews and 90% Arabs and Christians. Christians made up approximately 25% of the population, and then the rest of them, the people were Arabs. It's commonly known that around this time, the British had the mandate over this land, meaning they had the authority of what would happen, and they would make decisions for the people that lived in the land of Palestine. This in itself is problematic, even though, during war, there are certain greater powers that take over lesser powers. And at this particular time, the British took over the rule of the land of Palestine. So they took it upon themselves to decide what would happen. And there was a number of outside forces that came to bear and bring pressure on Palestine. One of them was the Balfour Declaration, of course, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and then the impending Jewish immigration because of the Zionist movement. Also, the Holocaust itself, the Peel Commission, and this King Crane Commission. And we're going to look at a number of those elements that came to bear on the land during and around the time of the formation of Israel. So starting with the Balfour Declaration, this was a declaration made by Lord Balfour. Actually, he forwarded the declaration to a philanthropist, a Jewish fellow named Rothschild. And what he said, basically, according to the authors, they brought it to the War Department, the British War Department, and Balfour agreed that the state or the land of Palestine should indeed be a home for the Jewish population. I'll actually just go ahead and read the Balfour Declaration. It's about 67 word paragraph, and it says this: His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. it being understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So right from the get-go, the Arabs in Palestine were being controlled by the British, and unbeknownst to them at the time, the Balfour Declaration. Rothschild was a Zionist, and he had every intention to see Jews supplant themselves in the land of Palestine. There were existing Jews already at that time, but as we've already said, it was a very small part of the population. The Sykes-Picot Agreement also came to bear on this, on the people, the Arabs living in that region. And the Sykes-Picot Agreement was a secret agreement between the French and the British. The individual representing the French was Francois Picot, and then Mark Sykes from the British side. They secretly decided that they wanted to carve up the spoils of the Ottoman Empire. They included the Russians in this because they needed the continued support of the Russians, promising the Russians that they also would have a portion of the Ottoman Empire. However, they also promised the Arabs, who they needed to support the Allies in World War I, they promised the Arabs that they would give them a portion of control over that area as well. So you have a double promise that is contradictory. On the one hand, you have the British mandate giving, the Balfour Declaration giving a promise to the Jews that they would have the land. And then on the other hand, you have the Sykes-Picot Agreement giving a promise to the Arabs that they would have the land. The British denied the Sykes-Picot Agreement, but we came to find out through the Bolshevik Revolution. The document was actually found in Russia, and it was Lenin who called the French and the British colonial thieves. He might have been the first one to call them out on their colonialism. So these are two of the elements that are bearing pressure on Palestine. Add to that the Holocaust, the trauma of 6 million Jews losing their lives. They were being annihilated and eradicated. Hitler wanted to just completely annihilate the population of Jews, as we all well know. So for the Jews after that to want a homeland, to want security, and want a place where never again would they be subject to that kind of annihilation and that kind of violence from outside forces. It's completely acceptable. It's completely rational. However, the choice of where they would end up is debatable, and that's what we're talking about today, trying to understand October 7th, not just from that event, but also from the events leading up to October 7th. It would not surprise anybody, I think, if we were to look back at 1936 thereabout and see that the Arabs actually revolted against Jewish immigration. And there's not a small reason for this. If we look at some of the conversations of the Jewish people that wanted to make Israel-Palestine a homeland for the Jews, we'll see the racism and the discrimination against the indigenous Arabs. I'm just going to read briefly an excerpt from Golda Meir. She says, "It was not as though there was a Palestinian people in Palestine considering itself as a Palestinian people. And we came and threw them out and took their country away from them. They did not exist." Let me read that again. "It was not as though there was a Palestinian people in Palestine considering itself as a Palestinian people, and we came and threw them out and took their country away from them. They did not exist." This might not be a surprise to many people. However, in the media, we hear often that it is the Palestinians who are refusing to acknowledge the existence of Israel. Here's one piece of literature that contradicts that narrative. There are others, and I'm about to read it, but I'm not sure if I was in that position, living in that land in the 1930s, having this pressure come upon me of Jewish immigration. I think it's rational and reasonable for the Arabs to do something, to respond in some way. I, of course, don't agree with violence of any kind. Nothing justifies what Hamas did on October 7th. Nothing justifies suicide bombings. Nothing justifies rape or beheading or burning. These things only lead to more violence, as we, of course, are now seeing in the Gaza Strip. But conversations and attitudes that look at people, other people other than our people, as less than, as undeserving, as unworthy, creates, at the very least, a sense of indignation. And it's a complete insult to say that you don't exist, when, of course, there was an incredible culture that was developing and growing in the land of Palestine by the Arabs. They may not have called themselves at the time Palestinians. I'm not completely sure about that. But I know when COVID hit, the crisis itself had me finding identity with people who thought similarly as I did. And I cheered them on to Ottawa. And I aligned myself, and I became known as a group or associated with a group who wanted a greater conversation around the issue of the science and the mandates and the lockdowns, etc. But my point is, although the Palestinians may not have called themselves Palestinians at the time, they certainly started to assemble and created a sense of identity because of the pressure that was put upon them. Al Jazeera does an incredible documentary. Actually, they do several documentaries describing the situation for the Palestinians in the 1920s. I'm just looking at my notes here. They have Al Jazeera talks about the industry, the trade routes from Jaffa to Haifa. They describe a vibrant commercial and community infrastructure. There was a railway that was being developed that would connect Africa and the Middle East and Europe. There was developing media and arts and sports and poetry. The culture was growing and developing. According to Al Jazeera, they were positioned to be a world player in the 1920s and beyond, when all of these machinations of the outside world were coming to bear upon them. The second reading I want to give you is also from this book. I've chosen Fateful Triangle, the United States, Israel, and Palestine. This is what Ben Gurion says. He says he followed Weizmann's line when he stated that there is no conflict between Jewish and Palestinian nationalism because the Jewish nation is not in Palestine and the Palestinians are not a nation. Essentially, the same view was expressed by Moshe Dayan at a time when he was a principal spokesman for the Labor Party. The cause of the Palestinians, which he professed to understand and appreciate, is hopeless, he intimated. So they should establish themselves in one of the Arab countries. I do not think, he added, that a Palestinian should have difficulty in regarding Jordan, Syria, or Iraq as his homeland. Like Ben Gurion, Dayan was asserting that the Palestinians, including the peasantry, had no particular attachment to their homes or to the land where they had lived and worked for many generations. And our understanding is that the Arabs in that region had lived there for approximately 200 years. We also know that the great Egyptian Sultan Salah ad-Din won back the city of Jerusalem from the Crusaders, and it was the Arabs that ruled that area for over 600 years. This is important because to because the Muslims in that region are not new. They have been there consecutively for 600 years. And part of the argument is that the Jewish people have a claim to that land as well because of the promise that was made to them approximately 1900 BC. Abraham left the land of Ur and he came closer to the land of Canaan. He had, through his lineage, he had Jacob and Esau, and there was a promise given to Jacob that he would conquer that land. Yes, they lived there. They resided there. They grew, and their culture developed as well. In AD 70, it's commonly believed that the Jewish people were destroyed. Not the people, but the Israelites were scattered, and the temple was destroyed. And from that point on, they dispersed. Now, the question is, did that promise hold true forever? Or was there a point where the Jewish people no longer had authority or any connection according to the promise of God? That's something that I'll be discussing with a pastor later on in this series. If you want to come back and hear that conversation, I would welcome you to do that. Now, we're looking at this homeland of the Arabs before 1948. I want to read something that I got from Al Jazeera as well about how the Palestinians formed themselves into a cohesive identity. They say that the Palestinian national movement began in Jerusalem alongside the British Mandate, calling for independence of Palestine in the lower house of the Ottoman Parliament. The first Arab-Palestinian Congress organized by local Arab and Christian groups in 1919. 30 men attended and insisted on an end of the British Mandate. The elite in Palestine, the more financial stable individuals started to form this group, obviously because they were prospering, because of the developing industry, because of the railway, etc. So how can we as a people, looking onward, make sense of all this? We can see clearly from history that the Jews, by and large, were not in the land of Palestine. They wanted to immigrate there. They wanted to, well, mostly the Zionist movement, a movement to see Palestine as a national homeland for Israel, for the Jewish people, was growing and developing momentum. And there were outside forces that were saying, yeah, we would support this. And one of those forces was the King Crane Commission, or the Americans. They wanted to go into the land of Palestine and get a sense of how the local people would feel about this mass immigration of Jews. So they went and they formulated a group of people to actually do this work and to try to understand what was happening at the time. Before I do that, before I talk about that, I want to also read a portion of what Balfour said after he made the declaration, not long after he made the declaration, or forwarded, more precisely, he forwarded the declaration. This is what he says: "The contradiction between the letter of the covenant and the policy of the Allies." So in other words, the contradiction between what is being said and what is being written on paper and the actual actions on the ground is a contradiction. And it is even more flagrant in the case of the independent nation of Palestine than in that of the independent nation of Syria. For in Palestine, we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants of the country, though the American King Crane Commission has been going through the form of asking what they are. The four great powers are committed to Zionism, And Zionism, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in age-long tradition. I'm not sure what he's referring to when he says age-long, perhaps a couple of decades. It is rooted in age-long tradition, in present needs, in future hopes, of far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land. If we don't consider anything else today, I would like us to ask the question, why are the needs and the future hopes and the desires of the Jewish people more important than those of the Arabs at that time, or at any time? Why are one person's or one group of people's desires and hopes for their families and for their nations more important than other people? When we think that, in fact, one group is more important than another person, that's called racism. And we don't want to be accused of racism, but when we see it so flagrantly as he described, we have to admit that it is what it is. So going back to the King Crane Commission, before the commission happened, the individuals involved in gathering the data had a preconceived idea that indeed the land of Palestine should be prepared to receive the Jews and should be the homeland of the Jewish people. This is what they had to say after they gathered the information and reported it. The commission recognized also that definite encouragement had been given to the Zionists by the Allies in Mr. Balfour's often quoted statement in its approval by other representatives of the Allies. If, however, the strict terms of the Balfour Statement are adhered to, favoring the establishment of Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights existing in non-Jewish communities in Palestine, it can hardly be doubted that the extreme Zionist program must be greatly modified. For a national home for the Jewish people is not equivalent to making Palestine into a Jewish state, nor can the erection of such a Jewish state be accomplished without the gravest trespass of those civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. The fact came out repeatedly in the Commission's conference with Jewish representatives that the Zionists look forward to a practically complete dispossession of the present non-Jewish inhabitants of Palestine by various forms of purchase. These are the attitudes that the Jewish people had going into this project of making Palestine their homeland. They had no intention, as is evidenced from this literature, and many other articles and books have been written about this. It was not their intention to share the land with the people of Palestine long term. They did not consider the Palestinians an equal partner. They did not view this area as something to be shared with. And yet again and again, we hear in the media that it's the Palestinians who did not want to share the land. Now, initially, I think that was true. They saw the writing on the wall. They saw all the international players supporting the Jewish people to come into their homeland. And when the King Crane Commission asked them what they thought, they definitely said, we don't want them here. Again, I'm going to make a statement. Israel exists in that land. They have a right to exist. They are there. They are not going away. And now, how is it going to play out? So for the beginner, I think something important to consider is how would you feel? How would you react knowing that you had been on this land for a long time and there were people who were interested in coming over and not just sharing it with you, but really wanted to dispossess you of the land long term? One of the landmark events that started this dispossession was when the terrorist, and he was a terrorist, Menachem Begin, ordered the entire slaughter of the village of Daryasin. 260 odd souls were completely wiped out. And from that event itself, he sent a clear message. Anyone thinking about staying in their homes and in their villages will have the same fate visited upon them as what happened in Daryasin. This is atrocious. This is completely what we call genocide. The wiping out, the eradicating from a certain part of land a people. And these people had been there for over 200 years, in particular, these people living in the land of Palestine. In trying to understand what happened October 7th, I think it's also a war crime not to tell the full story. There's more than even two sides to every story. Most likely there's a multiplicity of perspectives. And to shut out some of the people who have legitimate say in the conversation, to me, that's part of war crimes. Not just the murder, not just the razing of villages, not just the suicide bombings. This back and forth war that has been raging for 75 years has a beginning. It has a definite process that has reached the height of horrific and horrendous violence that we're seeing today. Part of the peace programs or attempts at peace throughout the years, it's often been said that the Palestinians have rejected these peace agreements or these peace accords. Prior to 1967, and that's a date that we'll talk about in another session, but this was 1967 marked the Six-Day War, where the Israelis took over even more land than what was afforded to them in the Peel Commission. The Peel Commission made the recommendation that there should be a partition between the Israelis and the Arabs, the Palestinians. The Palestinians received the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and then the Israelis received all the rest of the land. In 1967, this Six-Day War saw Israel gain even more parts of the West Bank. The peace agreements or the peace accords that took place at that time or thereafter, and towards what we call modern day Israel-Palestine, repeatedly the Palestinians were willing to concede as long as the Israelis stopped occupying the West Bank. This is borne out in a number of books and articles. One of them is by Jimmy Carter, who went over there, and he wrote a book called Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. The Israelis, in fact, have never had the intention of sharing the land with the Arabs. They have wanted to slowly encroach and take over more and more of the West Bank. And you see that because of the settlements. The settlements are groups of Jewish people that moved into the West Bank. And there's all these little enclaves. And there's roads that connect the Jews and the settlements. And only the Jews are allowed on those roads. When I was there in 2013, I witnessed incredible indignities, incredible civil rights violations. And these settlements are just one of those violations. Just quickly, we were on our way somewhere and we were alerted that there was a house demolition in Bet Hanina. So we drove over there and we learned that this family whose house was demolished were educated. They were active in their community. They had attempted, the Israelis had attempted to demolish their house 3 times. And they went to the court, and the court put a stay of demolition against their house 3 times. But the time that we arrived, the Israelis came in at 4 a.m. They hauled grandma out of the house and the other family members, and they proceeded to demolish this house. This family was known to be outspoken against the Israeli occupation. They were educated. They had a higher status than most Palestinians. And that's perhaps why Israel targeted them. This is part of a program to eradicate the educated part of the population so that they can't speak out, so that there's more terror and that hope is diminished. This has happened over and over and over again to the Palestinians. I think I'll leave it there for today. I've said a lot. In trying to understand this situation, again, I don't at all agree with terrorism or what Hamas did. I want to say but, yeah, because there is a but. If but means everything I just said no longer is in effect, then I will say and. I want to understand clearly what happened on October 7th. There's not much to understand. It was a horrible terror attack. However, there are circumstances that have led up to this place of violence, and we can't ignore them. Next week, I'll be talking to a rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, in helping us to understand the state of Israel from his point of view. I hope you'll join me back here next week on the channel. Thank you for listening.